Welcome to today's Deep Dive the Learner. I want you to just, well, think for a second about how incredibly often we just walk past the most profound mysteries of
Oh,
existence.
absolutely. Without even blinking, usually.
Right. I mean, you step outside, you see a tree, you take a breath of fresh air, and you probably don't think twice about it. It just sort of blends into the background noise of everyday life.
Yeah, we totally take it for granted.
We do. But what if that specific tree and what if that exact breath of air you just took was actually the ultimate proof of a grand cosmic design?
That is the big question today.
It is, because today we are going to take the physical sciences like stuff you might remember from high school biology, and we're going to smash it right into some very deep, very existential philosophy.
Which is a really bold rhetorical strategy, honestly. We're basically taking a fundamental microscopic biological process and using it as a lens to examine the entire architecture of the universe.
Yeah, so get ready, because today's journey is really going to challenge how you view the absolute basics of human survival.
It definitely will.
We're looking at a translated excerpt from a text by an author named Shufeng, and this translation was edited by Kong Long and Alien. And I gotta say, the title of this work really lays its cards on the table.
It really does. There's no hiding the premise here.
Right. It's called There's a Supernatural Soul in the Universe, 40 Evidence Proving the Existence of the Greatest Creator.
Yeah, the author certainly does not leave any ambiguity about their core premise. I mean, the title alone tells you exactly the philosophical destination we're heading toward.
Exactly. So the text posits that life, the universe, and just the entirety of human fate are controlled by this, what they call a super wisdom.
Right.
And Shufeng lists 40 distinct pieces of evidence to support this massive claim. But today, we're going to zoom in on just one. We are looking at evidence number 14 from the author's list, which is the biological process of photosynthesis.
Which, is a really fascinating choice by the author, because instead of keeping the argument floating in the clouds of abstract theology.
Like just pure philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of that, the text anchors this massive, universe-spanning existential claim to a tangible, observable, and deeply ordinary biological mechanism.
Now, before we jump into the microscopic machinery of plants, I want to make our parameters for today crystal clear for you, the learner. Our mission on this deep dive is to remain completely impartial.
Absolutely.
We are not taking sides on the theological claims presented here. We aren't here to definitively prove or, disprove the existence of a greatest creator.
Right, that's not our goal.
Instead, we're treating this as a fascinating thought experiment. We want to explore exactly how the author takes a basic scientific concept and builds this incredibly elaborate philosophical argument around it.
We are essentially examining the structural integrity of the argument itself. And, well, to understand that structure, we really need to look at the philosophical foundation the author lays down before we even get to the biology of a leaf.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the author starts with some really heavy-hitting assertions about fate and control.
They really go right for the existential jugular.
They do. The text suggests that if we just calm our minds and really pay attention, we can quite literally feel that there is a supernatural power controlling the movement of the universe.
Yeah, the author claims this power controls the birth and death of all things, and even dictates the actual track of human life itself.
Which is a lot to process.
It is. The author writes that no one can deny fate, yet paradoxically, no one can truly grasp their own fate either. It establishes this profound sense of surrender,
Yeah, like we're not actually driving the car.
Exactly. The text asserts that everything around us seems to be prearranged by certain powers, and we humans are merely moving according to the life courses assigned to us.
And when I first read that, I have to admit, I felt a little bit of resistance. It's an uncomfortable thought, honestly.
Oh, for sure. It challenges our whole sense of autonomy.
Right. But it makes me think of an analogy. It feels like the author is describing human life as being a passenger on a moving train.
Okay, I like that.
Like you're sitting in your seat, you're looking out the window, seeing the world rush by, and you can definitely feel the rumble of the tracks beneath you, so you know you're moving and you know you're on a set path.
Right.
But you can't see the conductor, and you definitely don't have a key to the engine room. So is the author basically saying we need to look at the engineering of the train to prove the conductor exists?
That train analogy actually captures the author's foundational premise perfectly. You are experiencing the journey, but you are acutely aware that you are not driving the train.
Right.
And that realization prompts the author to ask these huge foundational questions, like, How did the universe come into being? Where did the massive variety of life forms on Earth come from?
Those are the big ones.
Yeah. If there is a supernatural power, where is it hiding? Does it resemble a human? Does it actually care for humankind?
And those are the kinds of questions that can easily lead to a total spiral of existential dread. They're so vast, they almost feel completely unanswerable. Like, how do you even begin to investigate the conductor of the universe?
Well, the author's solution is to stop looking out the window at the blurry landscape and start examining the bolts on the train itself.
Oh, I see.
By shifting the focus away from abstract spiritual voids and toward the physical, measurable world, the text sets up the premise that studying nature is the only reliable way to answer these massive questions.
So the physical world is essentially the proof.
Exactly. The text argues that the physical world is the physical manifestation of the Creator's intent.
Which brings us from the grand cosmic scale right down to the literal dirt beneath our feet. Let's look at this biological engine the author points to as proof of supernatural design evidence 14, photosynthesis.
Right. And to build this specific argument, the author starts by establishing the absolute baseline of human survival. The text asks, what do we fundamentally need to stay alive?
Air, water, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it lists air, water, salt, and crucially, the need to absorb nutrients, primarily carbohydrates.
And I get the biology there, but reading this, it initially felt like a massive leap, to go from the universe is vast and mysterious to, hey, let's talk about plant food.
It's a pivot, for sure.
How does the author bridge that gap?
By focusing entirely on human limitation, the text asks a really simple question. Where do those necessary carbohydrates come from?
And the answer is photosynthesis.
Exactly. The text defines photosynthesis as the process where plants and other organisms use light energy to convert carbon dioxide and water into the nutrients they need to grow. The author is highlighting a barrier here.
What kind of barrier?
Well, we need these nutrients to live, but we cannot create them ourselves. We are completely dependent.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because the author describes this process step by step. And when you read it through this philosophical lens, it sounds like the schematic for a highly advanced, tiny solar-powered chemical factory.
It really does read like an engineering manual.
Let's talk about the machinery. Imagine a leaf, right? Sunlight shines onto this leaf, and that light energy gets captured by chlorophyll inside the plant cells.
Chlorophyll, of course, being the green pigment that effectively acts as the plant's microscopic solar panels.
Exactly. So these biological solar panels catch the light energy. At the same time, the plant has been drawing up water from its roots in the soil.
Right.
And the captured light energy acts almost like a laser, decomposing that root water and splitting it right down the middle into hydrogen and oxygen. The water splits, and the plant essentially burps out the oxygen through these microscopic pores on the underside of the leaves.
Yeah, I believe the technical term is stomata, correct?
Stomata, correct.
They operate like tiny regulated exhaust valves on the surface of the leaf.
It is literally the factory's exhaust, but the hydrogen stays inside the leaf. Meanwhile, carbon dioxide from the surrounding air has entered the leaf through those exact same stomata.
Right, it's a two-way street.
Yeah. And inside the plant cells, the hydrogen reacts with that carbon dioxide to form carbohydrates. These vigorous carbohydrates then spread throughout the plant cells via its veins, which allows the plant to grow.
And the author goes even deeper into the chemistry here. The text explains that the most common type of carbohydrate created in this process is glucose.
Which is just a basic sugar, right?
Exactly. And this glucose does not just sit dormant. It combines with nitrogen, which, the author notes, is also carried into the plant mainly through that water absorbed by the roots.
Okay.
And this unique combination forms amino acids, proteins, and nucleic acids. These are literally the fundamental building blocks of all biological life.
The text even takes the time to distinguish between the types of carbs being made. It notes that carbohydrates are compounds of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms.
Yes, the elemental level.
And the author points out the difference between simple carbohydrates, where the molecules contain just a few of these atoms, like sugars, glucose, fructose, and complex carbohydrates.
Which are much larger structures.
Right, which have many more of these atoms linked together, forming things like starch and cellulose.
And, the author includes this level of chemical detail for a very specific reason. It isn't merely a science lesson to fill space.
Why do they include it then?
Well, by outlining the scalability of this process, from quick energy, like glucose, all the way to the structural integrity of cellulose that makes up entire forests, The author is emphasizing the staggering precision of this system.
Oh, I see.
It is a setup to highlight a very stark biological reality. The human body utterly lacks the internal elements to conduct this chemistry.
We're completely incapable of doing it.
We are, and the author uses this stark limitation, our total inability to produce our own food out of raw environmental elements, as the bedrock of the argument.
Because it forces us to rely on something else.
Precisely. For the author, it proves our absolute dependence on a system designed outside of ourselves. We are completely reliant on green plants because they can perform a miracle that we fundamentally cannot.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate for a second here.
Please do.
The text looks at this intricate biological factory and says, look at this perfection. It must be intelligent design. But anyone with a background in evolutionary biology is going to raise their hand and say, hold on, this isn't a miraculous factory dropped from the sky.
Right, they'd point to natural processes.
Exactly. They'd say, this is the result of billions of years of trial and error. Natural selection simply favored the ancient organisms that randomly mutated the ability to use sunlight. So how does the author handle that massive, well-established scientific counter-narrative?
That is the central tension of this entire text, honestly. The author doesn't necessarily deny the mechanical steps of biology. They actually rely on them to make their point, as we just discussed.
Right, they embrace the chemistry.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the text asks the reader to look at the sheer mathematical improbability of the endpoint. The author argues that even if you accept billions of years of trial and error, the fact that the error eventually resulted in a hyper-efficient system that perfectly sustains all higher conscious life forms, well, they argue that requires a guiding intelligence.
So the end result is just too perfect in their eyes.
For Xifeng, yes. Random chance simply cannot account for a flawless, interlocking life support system that preemptively solves the survival needs of species that hadn't even evolved yet.
Wow, it really reframes how you look at, like, a simple salad.
It really does.
Because part of the carbohydrates formed inside the plant are used by the plant itself to survive and grow. But the excess is stored in the leaves, the roots, and the fruits. And that stored excess is exactly what humans and animals absorb when we consume them.
Right, we just take it from them.
We are basically harvesting the stored energy of this microscopic solar factory.
Which logically progresses to the next phase of the author's argument. The text moves from the microscopic chemistry to the inescapable global scale of this system. The author begins to outline the unavoidable food chain.
Ah, yes. Because there is always someone who thinks they're the exception to the rule, right?
Oh.
The author actually anticipates a counter-argument here. The text brings up a hypothetical person who says, well, I don't rely on plants. I am a strict carnivore. I only eat poultry and domesticated animals, so I don't need plant photosynthesis to survive.
It's funny, people very often disconnect themselves from the primary source of their resources, especially in the modern world.
They just see the meat at the grocery store.
Yeah.
But the author shuts that logic down immediately.
How so?
The text points out the obvious but profound truth. Without the photosynthesis of plants, there would be no poultry or domesticated animals in the first place. Because those animals rely entirely on plants for their own survival.
Right, they have to eat too.
So what does this all mean for the ultimate meat eater? Basically, the text is reminding you that even your steak is just heavily processed grass.
What's fascinating here is how the author extends this dependency to marine life as well. The text notes that even if you claim to survive solely on a diet of fish, those fish ultimately rely on the photosynthesis of microscopic algae and protists in the ocean. There is absolutely no escaping the loop.
From a natural point of view, the author states very clearly, only plants can make food. Period.
Period. Everything else just takes.
Humans and animals cannot make food themselves because our bodies lack the necessary elements for photosynthesis. We are forever relegated to being consumers, entirely dependent on these quiet, green producers.
And by constructing this flawless dependency loop, the author is doing something rhetorically powerful. They are not just diagramming a standard biological food web.
They're doing more than that.
They are establishing a strict top-down hierarchy of creation. In this framework, all animal life, including all of human intelligence, all of our technological achievements, all of our sprawling cities, is fundamentally helpless.
That's a stark way to put it.
But it's true to the text. We are tethered entirely to this primary act of chemical creation happening silently inside a tiny leaf.
It is incredibly humbling when you think about it that way. We like to think of ourselves as the apex of the planet, but we are essentially dependents.
It perfectly underscores that feeling of fate and control the author mentioned at the very beginning of the text. We are not the masters of our own survival. We are entirely dependent guests in a system engineered by something else.
But the author doesn't stop at the chemistry inside the plant or even the food web outside of it.
No, they take it one step further.
Just when you think this biological engine couldn't be more crucial, the text dropped the final, most mind-bending piece of the puzzle. Because our dependency goes far, far beyond just getting enough calories to stay alive.
Right.
The final pillar of the author's argument rests on the perfectly balanced dual-purpose nature of photosynthesis.
The author describes this as the tremendous function of photosynthesis beyond simply making food. And that function is the absorption of carbon dioxide and the simultaneous release of oxygen.
The exhaust from the factory.
Precisely. The very byproduct of the plant's food production happens to be the exact molecule animal life requires to respire and survive.
And it goes the other way, too.
Exactly. And the waste product of animal respiration, carbon dioxide, is the exact molecule the plant needs to absorb in order to build its food.
I really want you, the learner, to pause and imagine this for a second. Imagine you are an engineer, and your goal is to invent a machine from scratch.
Okay, an engineering thought experiment.
Yeah. Your task is to invent a device that creates perfectly nutritious, energy-dense food out of little thin air, groundwater, and sunlight.
Which would be incredible on its own.
That alone would be the greatest, most impossible invention in human history. But wait, there is a catch. This machine also has to simultaneously act as a planetary air purifier.
Right, cleaning the atmosphere.
Oh, and it also has to act as a global thermostat to regulate the climate of the entire Earth.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, when you lay it out in those terms, it ceases to sound like random biology. It sounds like a piece of highly advanced, purposefully designed technology.
It totally does, and that is exactly the point the text is driving at. The author paints an apocalyptic alternative to make sure the reader grasps the real stakes here.
They really want you to see what happens if the machine turns off.
Right. The text states that if plants did not make oxygen, animals and humans would have died out long ago. We would simply suffocate.
Furthermore, if plants did not absorb carbon dioxide, the author points out that the CO2 in the atmosphere would exceed the norm.
It would just build up.
Yeah. The greenhouse effect would spiral out of control, and the temperature of the Earth would become far too high for humans and animals to survive. We would overheat.
So, without this one specific biological process, we either starve to death, suffocate to death, or cook to death.
By connecting the microscopic chemistry to this macro planetary survival, you can see how masterfully the author leverages this ecological balance. The argument is not just that photosynthesis functions well.
It's that it functions perfectly.
Yes, it's that its specific byproducts miraculously solve every single existential threat to animal life, all simultaneously.
It solves starvation, suffocation, and global overheating in one elegant chemical equation.
And for the author, this level of multi-layered problem solving cannot possibly be an accident of nature. It is too neat, too comprehensive.
Right.
It fits too perfectly into the exact requirements for human survival to be anything other than intentional design by a super wisdom.
Which brings us all the way back to the grand philosophical question we started with. We set out to ask if there is a super wisdom in control of human fate, and to answer it, we took a deep dive into the microscopic world of chlorophyll, glucose, and stomata.
And the author concludes this specific section of the text with a pointed, almost challenging rhetorical question for the reader.
What do they ask?
After laying out the chemistry, the food chain dependencies, and the planetary climate regulation, the text simply asks, do you think that the photosynthesis of plants begins and happens incidentally?
Wow. The author is basically looking the reader in the eye and asking, do you really think this is all just a massive, incredibly lucky coincidence?
The text utilizes this profound sense of biological awe to definitively argue for the existence of the greatest creator.
It really works on an emotional level, too.
It does. By making the reader hyper-aware of how incredibly precarious and dependent our survival actually is, the author attempts to replace that initial existential dread of the unknown with a deep sense of awe and reverence for the design.
It is a really powerful way to frame things. I mean, you look at a leaf, and instead of just seeing a piece of nature, you are seeing a highly sophisticated life support system engineered specifically to keep you alive.
Right. You were seeing the physical tracks of that train we talked about earlier.
Yes, you feel the tracks. And returning to our mission of impartial exploration, Regardless of where a person falls on the theological spectrum, you have to admit that the author's method is striking.
Absolutely. Using hard, measurable biological limits to explore spiritual limitlessness is undeniably thought-provoking.
It really is. It forces you to look at the mundane world completely differently. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the learner, with a new idea to mull over. Something that builds on this intersection of biology and design we've been talking about all day.
Because the world of science and human innovation, well, it never stands still.
No, it doesn't. Right now, as we speak, scientists in laboratories all over the world are actively working on a technology called artificial photosynthesis.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. They are literally trying to build synthetic leaves. They want to replicate this exact biological mechanic using human engineering to generate clean energy and pull excess carbon out of the atmosphere.
They are attempting to build that exact miracle machine you described earlier.
Yes. So here is the final provocative thought for you to ponder as you go about your day. If the absolute perfection and complexity of natural photosynthesis is the author's primary proof of a divine supernatural creator, what does it mean for humanity if we actually succeed in copying it?
That's a deep question.
If human scientists successfully replicate this supernatural mechanic in a laboratory, does that diminish the author's argument for a cosmic designer? Does it make the miracle less miraculous if humans can manufacture it? Or does it simply mean that after billions of years of riding the train, we are finally learning how to read the creator's blueprints?
That is a brilliant question to end on. It shifts the perspective entirely. It asks whether we are still just passengers or if we are finally stepping into the engine room.
Are we replacing the conductor, or are we just finally understanding how the engine works? Something to think about the next time you step outside, take a deep breath of fresh oxygen, and look at a tree. Until next time, keep diving deep.